right, welcome back, everybody. Got another episode of the Pressing Forward podcast, and I'm really fortunate with have with us today Joe Kent. He's a United States Army soldier, Green Beret, Special Forces. I don't know what the correct terminology on throwing that out there is. He's also a 2022 nominee for a congressional seat in the state of Washington, and I'm really lucky to be able to sit down and pick his brain about his time in service today. So, Joe, how you doing today, brother?
Yeah, great, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. I was more so like thank you for jumping on. I'm sure you're a busy dude. You got a lot of stuff going on. So it's really cool, like I had said before we started, to see that you're willing to get out there and rub elbows with one, your supporters and the people that follow you, and another veteran as well. So what do you got going on now that you kind of taking a seat back from the political side of things? Are you still pressing for another run at that congressional seat?
Yeah, I am, man. I'm a glutton for punishment. We're not allowed to quit. So I basically I fell about 2,600 votes short, so less than 1 percentage point. So I decided that hey, we're just going to get right back into it. So we just kicked the campaign back off in January. So right now it's 2023, so it's kind of like a break year, but there's no break if you're if you're a candidate. We're fundraising, we're doing all the grassroots type of stuff. So really just still grinding away at it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that's got to be difficult too with seeing that small fraction of the numbers of people that went out to vote. And I think, we could hash that out in a different setting on why that may or may have not worked in your favor.
Yeah.
But for you, to get back right on the horse, after being bucked off and knowing that, there needs to be some change enacted, and you definitely seem like you're the guy for the job. So getting right back out there and grinding at it, I think is the best way of going about handling that situation. So good for you, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Yeah. So, if without further ado, I guess we'll just jump right into it. I kind of want to get a background on who you are, how life was growing up, where you grow up, and then what kind of led you into the army. So if you want to start that off for us, go ahead.
Sure, man. Yeah, you don't realize how lucky you are growing up as a kid. I think until you get out there and you kind of grow up a little bit yourself, maybe have kids of your own. But I had an amazing childhood. I grew up. I was actually born in a little town called Sweet Home, Oregon. It's like a little logging community. My parents were working for the Forest Service. We eventually moved when I was about 5 up to Portland, Oregon, which at the time was a very nice place to grow up. It was kind of a mid-level city. You could be out in the middle of nowhere in the country within about 20 minutes, pretty much of any cardinal direction, really. So grew up there, was heavily involved in Boy Scouts. I'd have to say probably Boy Scouts and wrestling as a kid were probably like the formative experiences of my life. I think from the time that you're old enough to understand that you need to pick out a career when you get out of high school, I wanted to be a commando of some sort. So there was no internet, no social media back then, so I was just reading books about Vietnam special operations guys. Got really interested in the Green Berets because the Green Berets, to me, it seemed like always had a mission. Even if there was peacetime, they were overseas, they were training guys, they were doing unconventional warfare. So that was really appealing to me. I saw the movie. Not, I saw actually on TV before it became a movie, the Black Hawk Down incident in 1993. And because I was a young gung ho guy already then, I was already talking to recruiters because I was only 13, but I still wanted to go in the army. And I said to the recruiters I was talking to, I was like, "Hey, who were those guys that got in that huge, like, really graphic fight?" Because the '93 Black Hawk Down incident, I think, was the first time that like really brutal combat was pumped into people's living rooms with like the new cable news networks. A little bit happened during the Gulf War, but that was mostly like, "Hey, look how great our technology is." '93, that was just like, "Hey, up in your face, like brutal combat, Americans being killed, drugged to the streets of Mogadishu." So I said, "Hey, whoever those guys are, I want to be one of them." And the recruiters were like, "Well, they're Army Rangers, and you can join. We can give you a contract to become an Army Ranger right away. You can't go to Special Forces. That wasn't available at the time." So that pretty much just put me on the trajectory. Right when I turned 18, graduated high school, shipped off to boot camp like a week later.
Okay, so did I know you obviously real life events had kind of thrown you on that path, but did uh did a man named John Wayne or Sylvester Stallone have any play into you wanting to be a Green Beret at all?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure, man. Absolutely. Yeah. The Green Berets of John Wayne and then good old Rambo, First Blood, out there. That was definitely helped out with some of the mystique. And then the A team, actually, those guys
Yeah,
were Green Berets as well.
yeah.
So yeah, so definitely had everything kind of lined up that way. It's funny though, because at the time I was open-minded. I had an uncle who was a Marine, so maybe I wanted to be a recon Marine. The Marines definitely have like I think the best PR out there. And then Dick Marcinko, the guy who wrote
The
Road
Navy
Warrior,
SEAL, right?
Navy SEAL, man, his book came out when I was in high school, and I read that thing probably like 4 or 5 times. And I like the water, grew up, swimming in the Columbia, some of the Pacific, and some cold water. And I was like, man, maybe I should be a Navy SEAL. When I went to go talk to the recruiters, though, the Marines were basically like, you join the Marines, you'll be a rifleman, we'll give you a job, and you should just be happy to be here. And I was like, man, I was like, that sounds really fishy. Like, and the Navy basically said the same thing. They were like, well, so, first, like, join the Navy, and we'll give you a job. And then, you'll probably get a chance to try out to be a Navy SEAL. And I was like, that sounds like I'm going to be scrubbing barnacles off the bottom of a ship somewhere. The Army at least was like, here's step 1, 2, 3, and you'll at least be at Ranger Regiment if you follow these steps and it's written down in your contract.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that gives you a little more clarity and security when you're a kid looking or a young man looking to make that change and you've got that mindset or like that your vision of what you want to do and how you want to accomplish it and having those things kind of laid out for you. It seems like that obviously propelled you into making the decision to go the Army route. So 1998 rolls around, you go to Army boot camp or Army basic training. What was that experience like for you?
I think because I had just grown up wanting to go into the military so bad, it was like, wow, I'm finally here. I mean, I was just like literally happy to be there the entire time. I mean, there's definitely some parts that were hard and adjustment. People managing every minute of your day. That's a new experience, regardless of how you grow up. So, I think I probably had the same trials and tribulations as everybody did, but I was just overall like I thought it was really cool that they gave me BDUs to wear. That we all got our head shaved, like all those like hallmark moments you see in a movie. You're like, okay, well, I'm here now. I'm an adult. I'm on my own adventure. So I really enjoyed all of it.
Yeah, was that kind of your first experience of getting out on your own? Like, did you ever take part in like Boy Scout trips and taking off from the family for a couple of days or whatever, but nothing along the lines of being at basic training and AIT for 3 to 6 months or whatever, right?
No, nothing like that, man. I worked at a Boy Scout summer camp when I was in Boy Scouts. I'd be away for like 6 weeks or whatever. You'd see your parents here and there. But no, it was definitely it was cool because most of my friends that were graduating high school with me, they were either going to college, which to me seemed like just an extension of high school, or they were kind of milling around in the hometown. And I was like, look, I got a plan. I'm out of here. I'm going to the other side of the country. They're gonna give me a gun and pay me. Like so, I felt really cool. Like I bought into all the recruiting stuff, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same in the sense of when I joined the Marine Corps, it kind of I had that ability to take decision on what I wanted to do and like knew that I wanted to go into the infantry. So I had that
Yeah.
security, like, all right, this is for sure the route that I'm gonna take with that. And then once you get there, you're like, oh man, it wasn't Arlie Ermy, like beating your ass, but it was borderline, like right on the cusp of being
Right on the
that
edge of
without
it.
without
Yeah.
like yeah, right without like putting their hands on you. Um, when you get through, because did they still do it the same way they do now in the sense of it's like a pipeline if you go because you went in as 11 Bravo, correct? Like just infantry
Yep.
rifleman. Um, did they funnel you guys from basic right into AIT? So that's like that same pipeline that they do
Yeah.
nowadays?
Yeah, if you're an Army infantryman, it's basically the same model, I think, as the Marine Corps, where it's like boot camp and infantry school, kind of all in one. They wake you up one day, and it's the same drill sergeants. You're in the same place, and
Gotcha.
they say, hey, the rest of the Army's graduated basic training, but you guys haven't because you're now in infantry school. Congratulations. So,
Nice, nice.
yeah.
Well, once you complete that, is there any notable things that you went through that experience where either you knew like, yes, this is definitely something that I enjoy doing, or you were like, I want to take this to the next level and see what goes beyond this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had some really good drill sergeants. Our company first sergeant was from Ranger Regiment. He had jumped into Panama, so he had a combat scroll, and I was like, man, that guy's like probably the baddest dude I've ever been in. Ever been in the presence of. So wherever he came from, I want to go there. Luckily, I had a Ranger contract, so I went to airborne school and then Ranger indoctrination. Right after that.
Once you got to that Ranger indoc, did the tempo or the training, the instructors, was it a complete mindset shift in from what you had previously experienced to what you're dealing with now?
Yeah, I mean for sure. I mean, because basic training is like a big machine, and so you can even as a young 18-year-old, you can tell that this is a very rigid environment where like even the drill sergeants are supervised. Like you can just tell because it's the whole that whole side of Fort Benning is just basic training. Now Ranger Regiment's very different. Like the ranger instructors come and they pick you up from airborne school, and they make you run down to the compound. And then once you're in the ranger compound, you're behind the famous brown, I don't know if it's still a brown fence. At the time it was a brown fence. You're behind this brown fence, and you're like, wow, I'm actually in some place that's like fairly elite. And there's a handful of instructors, cadre here, and it's going to be on them to select us. And that was that was probably the first time where I was really, really challenged as far as like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. Like during basic and AIT and airborne school, it was like, okay, do what they say and like you'll be fine. However, like when I got to the ranger indoctrination, it was like you had to be putting out 110%, otherwise they were going to get rid of you, or you just weren't going to make the standard.
Right. Now, is that RIP process, is that prior to going to assessment and selection, or is that all rolled into one thing?
It's just the selection process to
Okay.
get into the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So once you make it to through that selection process, they put you with either 175, 275, or 375.
Exactly. Yeah, I got assigned to Second Ranger Battalion. Most of the guys in my class wanted to go to the beach. They wanted to go to Savannah, and there was only a handful of us that actually wanted to go back out to the West Coast. So I was lucky. I got to go to Fort Lewis, which is just down really about 50 miles from where I am right now.
Yeah, and that's in Washington, correct? Yep.
Yep.
So once you go to Second Ranger Regiment, what is the because something pretty pivotal happens while either was it before or after you had gone through selection?
I was my first day of selection. It was September 11th.
Really?
Of 2001. Yeah. Yeah. So I did about 3 years at Second Ranger Battalion, peacetime Army. Probably the best place I could have gone as a brand new private. And especially for that time frame, I don't think the rest of the Army or really the rest of the force was preparing for the conflict that we were heading into, because September 11th caught us off guard. However, the Ranger Regiment, from being active in Panama, Grenada, Desert Storm, and then especially 1993, the Mogadishu incident, Ranger Regiment was really focused on urban warfare. So I got 3 years of learning how to kick indoors, shoot, be physically fit, be proficient at combat medicine, those types of just those real fundamental things that later on in life I am absolutely 100% positive saved my life later on down the road. So I got to do probably the most. I got to be in a unit that had the funding and the experience to really equip me for what lay ahead.
Yeah, that's I personally feel like that's one of the biggest things is that previous experience that your leadership has and the way that they're going to pass that down to you. So those, very key basic building blocks to like your baseline foundation to if I can know my job, know the basics and be able to do these things proficiently, then that sets you up for success as you go to progress down your career. And it seems like once that op tempo had switched and that switch had been flipped, it served you for the better. Now when after September 11th had happened, and the GWAT kicks off, what was like the noticeable transit or a noticeable change that you saw from the way that things had been run previously to what they're going to be doing now?
It's funny looking back on it because it was kind of a slow ramp up, even though now when I think back, it all kind of moves really, really fast. But transitioning from like the peacetime military was funny because when I was in selection for 9/11, been in Ranger Regiment for 3 years. I had decided that, hey, now I think I'm ready to go try out to be a Green Beret. So I was in selection. In selection, it's like it's a controlled training environment, and they called us in the classroom, and they were like, "Hey, America's been attacked," and I was like, "Is this part of the scenario? Like, are they messing with us?" And they eventually told us, "Hey, no, they let us watch the news, gave us newspapers. They let guys who had family in New York and DC call home." And so for me, with my 1990s mentality, I was like, "Dude, I'm gonna miss the war. Like, they are gonna go, we're gonna go kick someone's ass really, really quick." And then it's going to be over, and it's going to be like Panama or Somalia, and there's not going to be another war for the next 15 years, and I'm going to be a chump. So I was terrified that I was going to miss the war, which after 20 years of war sounds crazy to say. So that happened, and then it takes another year and a half to actually become a Green Beret. So I was in training in the Special Forces course for that initial part of the Afghanistan war. It's funny because when I got back, you have to go back to your unit, and then you have to go right back to Fort Bragg for the Q course. When I got back to Ranger Regiment after a month after September 11th, they were like, "Hey, we might jump into Kandahar." And so we all kind of got excited about that, I think, for like a minute. And then we saw one morning that 3rd Ranger Battalion jumped into Kandahar. And so, I mean, most of us, I think, were like, "Oh, dude, we just missed the war of our generation. Like, what's going to happen next?" And so that was actually like really heavily on my mind for the vast majority of the time that I was in the Q course. And I missed the kickoff of the Iraq War, so I was positive. I was like, dude, I missed the entire thing. But when I got to fifth group, because fifth group they were the guys who invaded Afghanistan on the backs of horses, and then they did the initial part of the ground war. When I got to fifth group, like all the older guys there that were on my team, they were like, hey, yeah, we're going right back over to Iraq in like 2 months. This isn't going away. It's funny to think of in that mentality. But yeah, things got real. I mean, real fast. I mean, we started training really hard when we were back home, trying to incorporate lessons from the last rotation. And so yeah, it's night and day. Two different militaries.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine because I mean at this point I'm in, you talk about 2003, 2004. I'm in middle school still, like eighth grade, maybe freshman
Yeah.
year, something like that. And you guys are, prepping to go Iraq or Afghanistan. What was your first combat deployment?
It was into Iraq. So summer of 2003, I got out of the Q course like right around June, got assigned to fifth group. And by the end of August, we were right back over there in Iraq. And
Jeez.
when I got on my first team, man, like talk about like walking into a team room full of giants. I mean, like the vast majority of the guys on my ODA had been like the guys on horseback in Afghanistan. They had done the ground war in Iraq, and I was like, I have no idea what I can contribute to these guys.
Yeah, that was gonna that's funny you say that because I want to ask you what it was like for you to come into an environment like that, knowing that throughout this last couple of years you're going through training, running through the pipeline. Now you're at Fifth Special Forces Group, and you've got all this senior leadership, whether it be enlisted or officer, that have either made that initial push into Iraq or Afghanistan initially, or Iraq, and had been involved in combat operations. What kind of I don't know, mindset or things that you're thinking about as you're coming in? Obviously like, oh, how am I going to put up to this, or how am I going to hold myself up to these tests? But mentally, where are you at, as a young soldier?
I'm very excited, because it takes a long time to get through the Q course, and you're tested constantly, and so you're like, am I going to get cut today, tomorrow, whatever? And so by the time you earn your Green Beret, you're pretty relieved that you actually made it. And then you get the group, and you realize that like everybody's a Green Beret, and nobody cares that you're a Green Beret. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to you got to earn your keep. Like I mean, that was basically one of the first things my senior said to me, the guy who was my mentor on my team. He was like, yeah, man, everybody here has all the same badges and patches, and nobody cares. Like you've got to prove that you're worthy of being here and you're value added every single day, which was absolutely like the best advice ever. So, but I was mostly just excited. I mean, I was terrified until I actually got to Iraq and started doing operations that like I was going to miss the war. And I think even for most of my first deployment, I was like, this could be it. This could be the only time I ever go to combat. Because for me, my frame of reference was all the guys who were giants to me that they jumped into Panama, they fought in Mogadishu, and it was like they fought in a war for a day or two, and then it
Right.
was over.
Right.
So that was kind of the mentality. But yeah, I was really excited. It's funny looking back now because I remember getting briefs from some of our intelligence guys before we went into Iraq. And one of them, he was just like, "This is not going to be over anytime soon. We're going to be doing this for a very long time." And I was like, "How do you? I don't think so. I doubt it. But okay, sure." Turns out he was right.
Yeah, that's wild to look back at and see, because most of the guys that I have talked to that had participated on those early stages of the war, they all had that same mindset of like, I need to get there now or else I'm not going to get some. Like that, obviously being in the infantry, being in the special forces community, the mission is to put yourself in situations like that. So, one of the big things that I focus on is, fortunately, I was able to do 3 deployments in the Marine Corps, and there's guys out there and gals that have not been able to do a single deployment. So that mindset of thinking like I'm gonna miss mine, um,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy to hear people. I think from the outside, for civilians or people that may have not been in a position of combat arms, to hear people say like they're worried that they're going to miss being able to go participate in the war.
Yeah.
Did it hold up to your expectations, like that initial combat deployment that you go on to Iraq? Because not saying that there wasn't anything going on, but that's after Baghdad had happened. So like this is a couple months once Saddam's already been captured at this point. And wait, did he? Yeah, he has been captured, right? Didn't he get captured?
We captured him, not me. I wasn't there, but I was in Iraq when he was captured in December.
Okay,
So
in
I
this
got over
okay,
there in the
so
summertime.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So it was just a couple months prior. What was that initial deployment like for you? Was it pretty kinetic, or were you guys doing more so like looking for the deck of cards? How'd that go?
Yeah, so it started. It was really kinetic. So honestly, I mean, it exceeded my expectations. I thought maybe I'd get to go over and like I don't know, would get in a gunfight or something. Like again, the frame of reference is like you're either going to be one of the guys who gets in like the Mogadishu gunfight, or you're going to be the guys that are in all these other conflicts where like you're not really sure. So we got over there, and my team was initially tasked with unilateral direct action. So we were going after the deck of cards. I arrived in country. The team that we replaced, they went after, if you remember, Zarqawi, the
Yeah.
first head of Al Qaeda in Iraq. Zarqawi just blew up the UN compound, killed a bunch of diplomats. That, like, I think 48 hours afterwards, while we were actually en route over to relieve this team, the team went after the Zarqawi guys. They got into a massive gunfight. They got pretty much brought into a house that guys were committed to fighting and dying. So that team lost two guys. About half the team got WIA. So I got into country, and the guys that got medevac and the majority of the medevac and the majority of the team, except for like the captain and one other guy, they all left. And it was just the captain who had gotten shot in the leg, and he stayed to help us do handover, and one other guy. And so literally we were cleaning blood out of the Toyota Tacomas and restocking all the extra mags and frags into that. And so I mean, it got real really, really quick. And so we just picked up their target deck right after that. And, once we got the rest of the ODA over there, we went out and started just going after bad guys. And so we got to do combat fast ropes. We were doing, pretty much everything, jumping on the back of Toyota Tacomas,
Yeah.
all the stuff that I never thought I was going to get to do. I was like, wow, we are,
Yeah,
we
you're
are out
actually.
here. We're getting after it. It's like choose your own adventure out here. And the cool thing about special forces is like, I'm a, brand new guy on the team, but I'm given a ton of responsibility, but really just watching the way that my captain, an O3, a fairly junior officer, and my team sergeant, senior E8, but still an E8, like the autonomy they had over planning our operations, I was like, man, this is exactly where I want to be. This is the coolest place in the world.
Yeah, so that gave you a good insight on things to set you up for success in the future. I mean, thinking about doing a left seat, right seat, like how you guys had, like, okay, we're coming in the country, and basically the team that we're replacing essentially got, wiped out in the sense of taking casualties and wounded. You've got a platoon or a team commander, officer there that's got a gunshot wound in the leg. So it's not like he's going to be taking you guys outside the wire and showing you like, well, if you take this route, there's going to be, so you guys are just thrown into the meat grinder, and being a first deployment, a young team guy, you're like, all right, sweet. I guess I'll just rifle this direction, listen to the orders that are coming down from my chain of command. And it seems like, obviously you're still here, so it seemed like it worked out pretty well for you guys.
It man, yeah, it was a credible initial deployment, especially coming out of Ranger Regiment. That was kind of like my bread and butter. I understood like direct action and all that type of stuff. And then about halfway through that trip, right in the fall, my team got a classic SF mission. We basically got tasked with taking a lot of the former Saddam, the anti-Saddam militias, the Kurds and the Shias, and turning them into a formal Iraqi military unit, into the commandos, which eventually became the Iraqi Special Forces. So we went from kicking indoors, hanging off of helicopters, to like working in a split team. We trained up a bunch of Iraqis that we didn't know. We gave them guns. Only like one or two of us spoke a little bit of Arabic, and then we were living basically in a team house. We went to split team operations, so it was me and four other dudes living with this company-sized element of armed
Jeez.
Iraqis, and we were just out there collecting our own information, going after bad guys. It was, again, that was another moment where I was like, this is what I did in Robin Sage in the Special Forces course, except for like I'm smack dab in the middle of
Yeah.
Baghdad.
And
So
at that point in time, I bet if you were to go back to yourself and training, you're like, I guess this is a cool training operation, but I'm never gonna fucking do anything like this when I get in the real world. And there you are, a
basically,
year later doing that type of thing.
yeah.
That's a cool thing to see, especially obviously I'm not a special forces guy, but how you guys are able to get the funding and having that. I guess the leash is there's not even a leash for you guys, like whereas most conventional units, like they got that choker on pretty tight, and like they might allow some slack, but it seems like you guys are just like, okay, sweet, me, four dudes, 100 Iraqis, 120 Iraqis. We're teaching them how to get down what they get down, make entry, do patrolling, setting up their, base defenses and things like that, your typical fit operations. Um, is there a notable instance on that first deployment where you saw, I don't know, some hope with the way that you were training the Iraqis, thinking like, well, maybe these guys might actually be able to handle this on their own?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting because when we were first tasked with demobilizing the militias and turning them into a conventional unit, there was a lot of big picture things going on that I didn't quite understand. I understand what was happening now that I've had a chance to step back from it. But at the time, we basically were constrained. We weren't allowed to use any of the members of the former Saddam military, which was a massive standing army, predominantly Sunni, but also some Shias and stuff. We weren't allowed to use those guys. And my team leader and a bunch of other folks in the Special Forces chain of command, they told the folks in DC and the Green Zone, like, this is a terrible idea. If we tell these people they can't be in the military anymore, we
Yeah,
basically turn them
that's
into
right.
insurgents overnight. Like, and so this is the famous, Paul Bremer says, like, the debathification and all that. People can look that up if they haven't heard of it. Basically, we created an insurgency kind of overnight. We had a lot of the former, I mean, I was there as a brand new, 23-year-old Sergeant Green Beret, just trying to train my Iraqis like I had been trained in the Q course. And even I realized, because a lot of the ones that were Shia, they were openly loyal to Iran. And I was like, hey, man, this doesn't seem like a very good idea. I don't know if I trust these cats. Luckily, the Kurds we could trust. There was already a pre existing relationship between special forces and the Kurds. One of the really older guys on my team, he had worked with the Kurds in the 90s, way up in northern Iraq. So there was trust there. And honestly, the only reason I think we didn't get slaughtered on multiple occasions by some of these Iranian loyalists was because of the Kurds were really watching our back, because they knew that we were kind of their ticket to having a seat in Iraq. But yeah, that was I definitely I realized pretty quick that, hey, motivated Americans, like, we can train these Iraqis as long as we're going out on operations with them. When they started talking in late 03 about how we're going to hand over the whole country in 04, even then I was like, there's no way. We're either going to leave and it's going to be a disaster, or we're going to have to stay, because again, the US government made our lives very difficult by saying, like, hey, anybody who was a professional soldier, a cop, or knows how the sewage system works in Baghdad, you're all fired because you had to join the Ba'ath Party under
Yeah.
Saddam. Like, just that disconnect between, like, the official Washington DC narrative and, like, the ground truth, that to me was very formative for me at a young age. I really wanted to be a guy who could, like, find ground truth and give it back to decision makers.
I think that's a tale as old as time, though. If
Yeah.
you look
Right.
back at those situations, and I think, and when people say history repeats itself, we see these constant mistakes that are made in, especially such critical and decisive decisions as that. Is like, well, let's just up and fire everybody and tell them to F off and go about their business. Like, what do you think that these people are going to do? Like, we're creating a problem for ourselves, and nobody. I should there are leaders who will listen to the PFCs, the lance corporals, the sergeants, and some of your platoon commanders and stuff. That boot lieutenant on his first deployment that sees something that's outside the, like, hey, maybe if we attack the situation from this way or handle like this, communicate with these people, try to create a treaty, a truce, whatever it may be. You pass that up to the chain of command, and some intel analyst or some guy that sits behind a desk is going to say that that's not bad because, or that's not going to work because statistically X, Y, and Z, or some analytics
Yeah.
show that this isn't going to work as well when you are seeing that progress firsthand. It's quite ridiculous, and I hope that I don't even know if I can say that. I hope that future instances people start to take notice of that, because hasn't taken notice in the past. With I don't want to jump over and skip that entirety of that first deployment, but it seems like you got a good understanding for the lay of the land and what it was like and what was going to be needed to be done in order to give the Iraqis the ability to take control of their own country. Coming back from that first deployment, would you guys do like 4 months, 5 months over there on your first deployment?
We did about The first one was about 7 months when it was all
Okay.
said and done. So we kind of actually followed saw the special forces and Marines kind of did the same thing. It was the Army that would leave their guys over
Oh,
there for
brutal,
like
man.
14 months or
Yeah.
whatever.
No,
Yeah.
thank you. But
Yeah.
you go and do little, your 7 month deployment in Iraq. You get all this experience, little, get your boots a little wet, experiencing some combat, doing the fit operations, working with the Iraqis, seeing the way that things are laid out. Um, are you hopeful, after that first deployment, of being able to actually enact some real change, in that country?
From my tactical perspective, I was pretty proud of the work that we had done with the Iraqi commandos at the time. I felt like we were actually able to take them when we took them from like a bunch of guys, like some of them couldn't read and write, some of them had never, worn shoes before. The Kurds were different. The Kurds had been, they were fighters, they were professional warriors, but we were able to take this kind of hodgepodge group and turn them into a fighting force. So tactically, I was pretty happy. I had a lot of ownership over the commandos, because I grew up reading all the Mac V SOG books of Green Berets, working with the Montagnards and all that. And so I was like, okay, this is what we're going to do for this conflict. So I was tactically very excited, but I was getting very skeptical over like, I mean, we were still getting told to like, I don't know, ask the Iraqis if they knew where the weapons of mass destruction were. We were going after the Al Qaeda guys, but we were starting to talk to. I mean, the great thing about working in special forces is that we do the full spectrum of operations. We can collect our own intelligence and then we can action it, rinse, repeat the intel cycle. So I got heavily involved in that on my first two deployments. But I was really starting to see from getting out there and talking to Iraqis that like this whole narrative about like Saddam having ties to Al Qaeda and weapons of mass destruction, like that was a DC fantasy, just like, hey, you need to fire like all the Iraqi army. So I was tactically very happy, but strategically, I was like, I don't know how this is going to end. Like this does not end well for us.
Yeah. Um, One thing I want to ask you is like how did you notice I mean I guess and two this is you just have to think about the op tempo that you guys have your lull time and training prior to the next deployment I think is a little bit your schedule and your rotation cycle is a lot different than any conventional style thing so you might not have the ability to take a step back and think about I guess not repercussions, but some of the damage, some of the trauma that you may have experienced on that first deployment. When you came back, did you think about any of that stuff at all, or was it get right back in the saddle and working up for that next deployment?
Right back at it, man. I mean, just the speed and the mentality. I think. I mean, probably same in the Marine infantry, but it was like, hey, what are we doing next? Like I was
Right.
on a special forces dive team. So I had to go to dive school when I got back. So, I had to go from, running around the desert with kit on to going and hold my breath in the pool to making sure I could do all that and then going and completing dive school and then jumping right back into the training cycle so that I could go right back on the next trip. And it's funny because we running the commandos, we actually had a really, really successful trip that first trip. And so then when we got back, because special forces is competitive, every single team wanted to prove to the battalion leadership that they could do the commandos that next mission. So like going and doing our full mission profiles and all this training stuff, we really had to put out and perform to prove that we were still worthy of doing that mission. And we did. We got the mission again, but it was just like no time to think about any of that type of stuff. There's just
Right.
time to get right back out there.
Now, through your career in the Army, I mean, you did 11 combat deployments. What, we could sit here all day and talk about each one and the mission set behind that. As those deployments progressed, right, as you go on number two, number five, number 11, it's obviously back and forth from Iraq and Afghanistan, right?
Actually, I despite sitting in Pashtun language school for 6 months, I couldn't buy an Afghan deployment. My
No
fifth group,
shit.
yeah, fifth group, we kind of got stuck with Iraq, and then I did some time in Yemen. When I was supposed to go to Afghanistan, I got sent to Yemen. I had retrained in Arabic, so went to Yemen, did some stuff in Northern Africa too. But yeah, I
Okay.
never went to Afghanistan. Yeah,
Okay. Well, shit, I guess I got you one up on that, man.
you do,
I'm
you got
kidding.
me.
No, but what, through that progression then, in the time that you spent in Iraq, was there, I guess, I don't know, this trying to frame it in the way, like, were there certain instances where you thought either we're gonna have success with this or this is a complete shit show and we're wasting our time here? And I'm not looking for you to give like shit on the army or, anything like that. I'm just your personal view of throughout, okay, here was in 03, 04. This is what it's like in 06, 07, and coming back to all these different times, seeing the progression or like the downgrade in, one, the morale, the troops, the environment, the kinetic environment, just kind of all encompassing.
To me, like I got really obsessed with being a guy who could go out and collect ground truth, which is one of our main jobs in special forces, but being able to like fuse intelligence and operations, that kind of became like my thing. I started out as a weapons guy. I eventually became an 18 Fox, a special forces intelligence sergeant. So like the team level analyst, but an analyst that gets to go out and, kick in doors and interrogate prisoners and all that type of stuff too. And then I became a warrant officer, and warrants are really responsible for fusing the intel and the operations. And so I kind of prided myself on trying to stay in touch with what was happening in Iraq. Pretty much every year of the war, I was in Iraq for at least 7 months, with the exception of 2010. Went to Yemen, and then I went back for the withdrawal in 2011, and then went back again for the ISIS nonsense. But mostly, I was just my feeling was that look, strategically, we keep getting this wrong, and we think that pouring more and more American resources into this and trying to turn this into like a Jeffersonian democracy, like if we keep doing that, if that's our end state, then we're going to continue to fail. My viewpoint was, hey, if we can provide ground truth back to higher, back to Washington D.C., we can prove that hey, there is a solution here. We're special operations guys, intelligence guys, we can surgically target whatever remaining bad guys are here, and the vast majority of us can get the hell out of here, because I frankly don't think we have much of an interest. Like I was in '04, I was in Phantom Fury. My team did one of the first breaches against the Zarqawi hospital out there, and at Telefar. So every time I saw us do these massive operations, I felt incredibly unproductive. It was just like we're getting good people killed because we're telegraphing exactly what we're doing. Leading into the surge, I felt the same thing. The only hope I had in the surge was that hey, we were actually finally starting to work with some of the Anbar tribes out west, and these guys were legit power brokers. We weren't just saying that you have to be part of our little fictitious government. So we were acknowledging that reality on the ground. But man, just the amount of like us pouring more and more troops into there, and it was just like, hey, we keep getting guys killed by IEDs, and I'm like, you know how you get guys not killed by IEDs? Send them home. Like if we're not
Yeah,
driving 31 flavors of Baskin Robbins from fob to fob, no one's gonna get smoked by these freaking IEDs.
seriously.
So like that was like that I never felt great about what we were doing in Iraq. I really enjoyed my job, but I felt like hey, it was my duty as a guy who actually had some experience here to go and say hey, there's a different way we can do this. But a big frustration I had was that like our political leaders could never fully articulate anything realistic that they wanted from Iraq, but yet we would continue to pour blood and treasure into it.
I think it's, it's hard to say. It's like the same thing that we talked about earlier with them not being able to see and interact on the ground. It's like you can send a battalion of Marines or a battalion of soldiers through, and clear an entire village, right? Or an entire city and set up outposts, but they don't understand like, the tunnel systems or, the rat lines that they have that come through there, the insurgency. It's the fact that they're going to get in behind you. Like you don't just
Yeah.
go in, it's like you squash this bug, this cockroach in this building, like there's bound to be 10 more in a different building. With that being said, like in that sense of, you're just pushing through and you're having Marines and soldiers kind of put themselves in situations that are one, getting them killed, two, maybe, you know, we all know that some like instances where the wrong people have been engaged and killed, and that creates a whole nother ordeal on its own, whether it's with the local tribe on the news, with the people back home in the States thinking that it's all done wrong. Do you think that it would have been better? And obviously, we can game the game and woulda, coulda, shoulda, but allow the conventional forces to maintain like a security posture, and then have the soft elements go out and do those hard knocks and take down those top tier threats and kind of knock all those pegs off to then stabilize and create an environment where you can then rebuild. Like, obviously there's, you could game the game, but would that have been your ideal way to kind of handle the situation in Iraq?
Yeah, it would have been, man. But I think one of the big things I eventually learned was that like the initial phases of Afghanistan, where like special forces and some CIA guys, backed up by the Air Force, went in and they kicked the crap out of the Taliban and Al Qaeda. Like that did not get anybody in the Pentagon paid. That did not get any generals, but maybe one promoted. And so, like, here you have Iraq, and it's like, oh man, we are going to get to use our armor. We're going to use CAS. We're going to get to deploy like divisions and brigades, and like that was the game. So yeah, no, I agree with you. I got pretty frustrated. Fallujah, I was still in '04. I mean, that was my second deployment, but I was still relatively a junior guy on the team. But I got a little bit exposed to it because there had been the first Battle of Fallujah for political reasons. It stopped, and then we like dug a berm around Fallujah, and we were like, we're gonna come attack you. And so like any real bad guy worth the damn escaped. All the people who wanted to fight and die and kill Americans, they flooded in there. And sure enough, we had intel. I mean, this is one of the initial exposures I had to like running agents and running sources. We had sources inside Fallujah that were like, look, all they're going to do is bait you guys into these houses, and then they're going to drop the houses on you. They just want you guys to come in the city so they can kill you. And literally watching Mattis and all these other leaders just say like, yeah, that's fine. We're going to put Marines in every single house. I was just like, well, excuse me, like, what the hell value is Fallujah to the United States of America? Like, why do we need to put, like, it just didn't make any sense to me. And I saw that repeated so many different times where it was just like, they don't want us to come in here with a scalpel, because the goal is to ply the military trade over and over and over again, you know. And again, it all kind of goes back to like, hey, political leaders in DC, like, what's this for? At the end of all of this, if we did secure Fallujah, Telfar, whatever town, if we did secure it, then what? Like, then what are we? How do you articulate to that, to the people who are sending their sons and daughters here to go fight and die, or to the American taxpayer who's spending trillions of dollars and we're going into debt for
Right.
this? You know,
Right.
that was just my constant frustration.
Yeah, that I wouldn't even know where to be. I mean, especially being a lower enlisted guy, and I'd never partook in any like intel planning op. I mean, I've written orders and been a part of op orders and planning routes, patrol routes, and stuff like that. But to be involved in that intelligence side and you firsthand knowing that like you're getting that data from a source that you're working, telling you guys that like it's not going to work out the way that you think it's going to, and relaying that information back to your chain of command, and them kind of just like shrugging their shoulders, like, well, HESCO needs to put HESCO barriers
Right.
out there.
Yeah.
Sodexo needs to put food on the
Yeah.
fucking plates to feed guys
Exactly.
at Camp Fallujah or Camp Ramadi. And I
If
never
that's
went
tanks, we're
to,
shooting them at something.
yeah,
You
so
know.
that's it's kind of ridiculous. To look back at it, it sucks to see that the loss and the suffering and the struggle and all of that had to happen. Kind of like for what? I think we all can say that when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, the tough get going, and when you're on the line, you're in the shit. The men, the women to your left and your right are the ones that propel you forward, and that's where those heroic, courageous actions come from, and the countless medals of honor that have been awarded, and everything in between. It all came from that, and there's some great stories of success and resilience behind that, but at what cost? At what cost was that paid? It is. And I don't want to make it seem, like I said, again, 11 combat deployments, that's a lot of stuff to, throw in there. Are there any notable mentions or things that you saw or participated in throughout that time that you hold near and dear? I mean, I'm sure it all is obviously held near and dear, but are there things that stand out to you that you remember and think of on a daily basis on, whatever deployment it was while you were in Iraq?
Man, yeah, there's so many. I mean, overall, I just being a Green Beret and getting to be work in small teams where literally we were just kind of put in the middle of nowhere, the middle of Baghdad, and said, "Hey, you guys go figure it out." I mean, there was a time when Zarqawi was kidnapping a lot of Americans, and there was the entire I'd say weight of the national intelligence community was trying to track down where a lot of these hostages were. And because we lived in the city and we had a robust local informant network, and we had that informant network because of our Iraqis that we were working with, because these Iraqis, they were all from the four corners of the country and really of Baghdad. And so we really had a great human network. And so we were able to track down where a lot of these kidnapping victims were, track down. We were kind of had like an episode of 24 trying to run down Zarqawi, but we were reacting and being able to get out there and get after these guys because we weren't constrained. We weren't having to wait for hire to show up with air support and all that. Literally, a lot of times it was just, I post some of these pictures sometimes of me and a couple guys throwing on Iraqi garb with our Iraqis and going out there and grabbing bad guys off the street and interrogating them, and then them telling us where the next target was. So a lot of that, just being able to conduct the full spectrum of operations, that really sticks heavily with me to this day. I got to work on a lot of the counter Iranian operations over there, so going after the Iranians while they were making EFPs, kind of breaking some of that intelligence. I mean, that was definitely a highlight of my career. Not overall happy with the way things turned out there, but yeah, that really sticks out. And just being able to serve with people who constantly wanted to go over and do the hardest, most dangerous operations. Like, that was still to this day, like, if you could put that into a bottle and sell it, you'd be a multi-billionaire,
Right.
because it's just like, hey man, you want to be the best. Everybody's competing to go to the most dangerous place and the most dangerous mission. Like, it's just something that it's something that it's hard to replicate anywhere else, and it's hard to explain to people. I know you've probably probably feel this. I think most veterans feel the same way. I really think that like when people talk about PTSD and veterans having issues, I think it's just really hard to go from that high where you're with like-minded people to like boom, now you're a civilian again. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, just that really at the end of the day, people, I'm happy to tell war stories all day long. I think my war stories are probably, just as cool as anybody else's. But really at the end of the day, it's the camaraderie that you miss.
Yeah, I totally agree. And throughout that time, I'm sure that you shifted units and saw guys come and go, had experienced your fair share of loss in multiple avenues. Um, you know, when did it start to catch up with you? Did you start to notice it as you got on deployment 5, 6, 7, 8, and it started to, I don't want to say slow down, like physically, but could you notice like things to start catching up with you and you sort of be like, oh, I'm not sleeping, I'm coming home, like not interacting with my family, I'm very standoffish, the hypervigilance is like through the roof. What kind of things did you start to notice, and were they things that you noticed yourself, or did somebody have to point those out to you?
I was I didn't get married and have kids until later on. And so I realized probably by about my fourth or fifth deployment, the first team that I was on, we stayed together for three deployments. We kept the same team leader, the same team sergeant for three deployments, which is rare. And our third deployment got really extended and really long. But a lot of the guys that had families, a lot of divorces, and a lot of guys who had to step aside from deploying after that. And I started to realize by like my fifth deployment that like this stuff breaks people really really fast. And like for me, my remedy for it, right wrong, was just to volunteer for the next deployment. I mean, it was easy to do because I didn't have kids and I wasn't married at the time. I actually, by the time I finally deployed, when I was married much later on and had kids, I had to put out some phone calls and text messages to old friends, and I was like, okay, this is way harder. Like
Yeah.
when you're single, like this is all like fun and games. It's like an adventure. When you're over here as like a husband and a father, like it's completely different. But yeah, man, I started feeling the strain. By probably I'd say like my fourth or fifth deployment. But I was just like, at some point this is going to be over, and I want to say I did the most that I could while it was going on. That's how I justified it in my head. And I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I've heard guys talk about, hey, maybe after like two or three deployments, like you make people take a year or two off. And like, I probably would have tried to fight somebody if they would have done that to me after my first couple deployments. But there's got to be I mean, I think the solution, this is why I'm trying to get into politics now, is have political leadership that doesn't get us involved in 20-year wars, especially when you're trying to preserve an all volunteer force. And I think we're seeing that strain right now nationally, where we just can't get people to join the military.
Oh,
But yeah,
yeah, that's very sad to see that. I mean, we come from this generation, this 20-year period where you've got men and women that stand up left and right, no questions asked, and sign their name on the dotted line in service of their country, in lieu of freedom and security, national security, and saving the family back home, and the red, white, and blue. And I think that was, um, I guess, propagandized in the wrong way, especially in I don't want to make it seem like I'm coming off. I'm trying to format it the right way because I'm just thinking about this now in the sense of it was very courtesy of the red, white, and blue, Toby Keith, Miller Lite. Everybody's got a flag on their front porch and everything. They want to be combined. They want to take out the enemy, and I think a lot of people did have that mindset of let's get in there and let's bomb them to hell, and then we'll come home and have a cold one. It was like kind of this. I don't want to compare it to Vietnam because it's a little quite a bit different. But in that sense of once they started to see the casualties, once people like had to like strap their boots on, they knew that they were going to be in for a little bit longer of a ride. They weren't as dedicated as they thought that they were. And then now you see that kind of all that spiraling downhill and all the things that are brought to light. It creates a hard it creates a strain on the military in general, in the sense that you see that people don't want to stand up and do that anymore. There's a lot of loss in the sense of patriotism, especially in the youth of this country. It's really crazy to see that, within that 20 years really isn't that long of a period of time, to see the downgrade, and that downhill slide of people that are willing to stand up and sign their name, in service of their country. You know, what kind of things were you doing, when you started to notice that you're taking a little more strain and stress on, as you go through your career? Did you seek some help, or was that kind of still push it to the side and keep moving forward?
Man, really, it was just, I mean, I'm still probably doing that to this day. It was just keep moving forward. Really, it was just like, hey, but honestly, for me, being in that environment of being on a special forces team and having really close friendships, I felt like I could talk to people. Like I didn't need. I mean, I remember when like the therapy thing became like a buzzword, and they're like, if you want to talk to a therapist, you can talk to a therapist. And for me, I was like, if you want to talk to a therapist, that's cool. But like, I got 12 therapists here. There's guys that know me inside and out. Like we're all gonna have a beer and talk about it. So like no, I really just tried to stay focused on the mission, and that probably wasn't the most healthy thing, but for me it felt like the right thing to do. I tried to think big picture that hey, like someone's going to end up going over here. You've been over multiple times. Like you know a thing or two. Like you can make a difference. Like you can't change US policy, but what you can do is you can try and keep the men and women to your left and right. You can try and keep that conventional military unit that's in your battle space better informed. That to me was kind of like what kept me saying. It wasn't until I met my late wife Shannon, who was also in the military, that I really had a chance to like talk about a lot of the stuff and the loss and the stress, because she was living the exact same life that I was.
Yeah, and that's and you guys got married in 2014, right?
Yeah, 2014.
2014, you guys had two kids. Do you have two kids together?
Yeah.
That was a, pivotal moment in your career, not to fast forward so far, but since we're talking about Shannon, um, January of 2019, right? That really, I don't even know how to phrase this in the right way. So, a detrimental incident happened, that impacted you and your family, in a negative way. I mean, are you comfortable talking about that and sharing that with us?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, Shannon's the reason why I'm in politics today, why I'm even in the public light. So yeah, Shannon was killed in Syria. She was on her fifth combat deployment, so she's one of the few women who was in special operations before it was even like really allowed or codified. She was an Arabic linguist, intelligence specialist, so she was over there with the special operations unit. Her and three other Americans were killed by a suicide bomber in Manbij. So that's kind of what brought it into the I guess the military chapter of my life. But yeah, that's yeah, that was huge. I mean, even leading up to deployment, that was huge because we didn't think that Shannon was going to go on that deployment. It kind of happened last minute. Because we had just started a family. We sort of thought the wars were winding down. I mean, ISIS was more or less defeated. I deployed in 2016, the counter ISIS mission. She had Afghanistan on me too. She had done 3 Iraqs and Afghanistan, and then she went out there to Syria. But man, we really thought, hey, this is over. Okay, one more deployment for you, and the wars will peter out, and we'll kind of move on with our lives. But it's not the way it worked out.
Um, how how did you how did you ultimately find out about Shannon passing?
I mean, everybody hears the story of the knock on the door and all that. I had a much different experience. So I retired from the Army in 2018, did 20 years. But my retirement wasn't like a real retirement. I retired on a Friday and I swore in on a Monday as a CIA paramilitary
Right.
operations officer. So I'd always wanted to be, you find out the different rungs of special operations, and at the end of it, you're like, wow, if I'm really awesome, I can go to to ground branch of the CIA. And so I applied for my last year in the military and got accepted over there. And so I wanted to stay in the fight. And I really wanted to continue to fight for the country. And that was like that was gonna be my second career. So I'd been at the CIA for about a year. I was actually deployed as well. I was on a shorter trip, but I was in Northern Africa, and I had been out that day doing some business. I came back to our small little base. And then a friend of mine who I was actually on a special forces team with, I followed him over to the CIA. He was my boss, and he just said, "Hey man, come here, I got to talk to you." And I thought like I thought I had screwed something up, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm going to give you all the information that I have right now because we don't have a lot of information." He's like, "There's been a suicide attack in Manbij. There is 4 Americans dead, and 2 of them are females, and there's not a lot of females in our business." So I knew that Shannon was in Manbij, so we spent about another frantic hour or two trying to call over to the guys in Syria until we eventually just got confirmation. So then I had to fly back to the States to meet to go to Dover to receive Shannon's remains.
Jesus, that's obviously I'm sorry for your loss. That's unfortunate that you guys have a family, and that's I only want to talk about this and bring light to this because that's a very um I guess that situation doesn't happen very often, where a husband and wife are both serving at the same time, both deployed at the same time, and you guys have both kids, obviously, right? Like how, geez, that's so you come back to the States, you receive her remains and everything. How did that go? How old are your kids at this point in time? Probably what, 5 years old, 4 years old?
No, 1 and 3.
Oh,
One
Jesus.
and three. So I was only supposed to be gone for about a month. So it was a short trip. My parents were watching the kids, and as I was, flying out of Africa, I was like, man, I got to stop. I got to stop. I can't get shot at anymore for a living because literally I wasn't in the most dangerous place, but I was still in a place where bad things happen. And I was like, man, the enemy today could have made my kids orphans, So it kind of wait. I was like, I'm being incredibly selfish, even pursuing this career with children. So I decided to step away after that. But yeah, it was rough. I mean, it still is, to this day. So my
Yeah.
kids are 5 and 7.
And obviously they know the sacrifice that that their mom had made. How do you wrestle with that? Like being a single dad, taking that loss, and what kind of things were your, I guess, motivating factors to keep pushing you in the right direction? And obviously your kids wanting to do right by Shannon, impact some change, but like mentally yourself, you seem like a guy that's you've done so much up to this point, and you've kind of put it all to the side. Is this one of those things that kind of, I guess, open the floodgates for emotion and like the things that you've experienced over the last 20 years?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I know at this point, I probably can't even count the number of guys I know that have been killed. Obviously, Shannon being the heaviest loss. But yeah, no, I think it did because it was the first time after she was killed that I really stepped aside and was like, okay, what happened for the last 20 years? Why did it happen? Why am I still alive? I mean, that's a big. I mean, and I think a lot of veterans feel that way. Like, why didn't I get killed? Why'd she get killed? Like why wasn't it me? And I think of it over and over again, like almost on every deployment. Like why did some of my friends die and I didn't die? I mean, that's a big thing, and it's still something I'm continuing to work through. But yeah, it was the first time for me that I had to step back and really think like, okay, not really even just like what next, like what's it all mean? And so for me, it's really just trying to put my kids first, but then also being really conscientious of the legacy of my wife, but then also the direction of our country. Like for me, like the most terrifying thing for me is that someday my kids are going to say, hey, like what was it all for? Like what was the deal with this war you guys fought for 20 years that ultimately like killed our mom? Like what's going on here at the country? Because it's worth pointing out Shannon was killed. Shannon and the other 3 Americans that were killed with her, they were killed a month after Trump tried to get our troops out of Syria the first time. And that's when a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats that thought they knew better than the guy the American people chose. That's when they worked against Trump. And so really they were supposed to be out of there Christmas Eve of 2018. But because of all the bureaucratic infighting, they stayed there. And so for me, it's just like that was the culminating moment of just all these people in the national security state, the military industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, that have just been screwing us for so long. That was the culmination for me. So I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something to actively work against that so that we can not send men and women off into a meat grinder. Like I'm not an isolationist. I know that at some point we America does need to go kick people's asses every now and again. Like we do. You got to. I mean, but at the end of the day, you do need leadership that really respects the people they're sending off to go and fight. And that's not something that I felt that we've had in this country for quite a while. So for me, it's just like, the next mission is to do as much as I can, whether that's running for Congress, getting into Congress, or doing something else, just to bring light to how much of a disaster our foreign policy's been for the last 20 years and what we can do to fix it.
I love to hear you say that because I think that it's definitely needed. On your most recent point, you're saying in the sense of getting yourself involved and doing what you, because there's so many, um, you know, bleacher stand hecklers and sideline sitters, and I'm guilty of that, man, because like I'm the kind of guy that says like, why aren't we doing this and why aren't we changing this? But do I get involved with local politics? Do I get involved with, other than shit posting on some Instagram or something, or talking shop with the boys when we're having some beers? Like I do not do anything to go outside of my comfort zone in the sense of standing up and, like trying to enact some change. So for you to be out there doing that, advocating for veterans, and not wanting us to just mindlessly throw our sons and daughters at the meat grinder, I think there needs to be a lot more men and women like you, especially with the military service. How are you going to enable or enact policy that trickles down to affects the service members or the veterans or the people that are fighting these conflicts on foreign lands? Um, and you've never yourself been in those shoes before. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And for anybody to sit there and think like, well, they have a degree or they have experience in whatever X, Y, and Z category it may be, regardless if you were an admin, logistics, supply, motor T, infantry, special forces, if you put your, donned a uniform, put that on and participated and understood what it was like to be a cog in the wheel and have that part to play, um, then you should be able to, have your input on enacting policy that involves national security or, domestic or foreign operations. It's quite ridiculous to see that there's a lot of political figures that wouldn't have a clue on basic, operations of anything in the military, and they're over here enacting policy that, forever changes families' lives. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just very, very frustrating that we were on that cycle for 20 years, but I think we have a real opportunity right now, to have veterans from our era step in at every level. You don't have to run for Congress, but to do something, because I really think that discrepancy between official narrative, what we hear from DC, and ground truth, I think that applies pretty much across the board on the issues that we're facing right now. I mean, 3 years ago we were told that like you need 15 days to slow the spread and take the vaccine. I mean, just the examples go on and on of like this ruling class we have in America that will sit here and tell us exactly what to do, and they'll enact policies that screw over the vast majority of Americans, except for the ones on the very top. And we're just supposed to sit there and take it. And so I feel like our generation, we should have a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. I do think there should be a lot more veterans that are like, you know what? Actually, no, I fought for our country. I'm going to have a say right now because I know what it's like to be a guy on the ground, not listened to right now. So whether that's, going to a school board meeting or, trying to influence policy at a national level, all of it is incredibly important. And look, yeah, I think I think us veterans should be the most skeptical people of power that there are out there, because like it's like whatever that ad is, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or
Yeah,
two. Like,
yeah.
don't give me like some cute story that sounds great in a speech and tell me everything's going to be just fine. Because you know what, like I've been lied to way too many times. So for me, I think that that's just absolutely critical for our generation. And like the Vietnam veterans, those guys, I think that they learned a lot too from their conflict, but they were treated so poorly when they came home. I think a lot of them stopped talking, and they didn't say that they served. They didn't say they knew these things about our government, and we repeated the exact same mistake. So I think we have one thing we have going in our favor is that we actually have a pretty grateful nation. At least most people, I think, legitimately when they say thank you for your service, like it's awkward, like we don't know what to say. But I do feel like they're sincere, because I think also like the older generation they still feel bad about how they treated the Vietnam veterans. So we don't have that working against us. Like we've been given a platform, we've been given gravitas, we earned it. But I think we should take that and say, hey, like we're going to be involved. We're not just going to sit back. We are going to be the ones driving the direction of our country, and we're going to learn from the mistakes that we made in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the different places that we were lied to.
Well, I think sitting here talking with you has given me a little more of motivation to partake in local politics. I mean, it's funny, my boss said to me today, because he let me leave work early. I told him, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be sitting down with Joe Kent later. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, tell him I say hi. So
It's
shout
awesome.
out to Mr. Peter McDade. But it's he's like, you could have a shot in politics, Mike. He says it in his Irish brogue, and I'm like, I don't know, boss. With my rap sheet, I don't think they'd take too kindly to my infantry tactics and the political side of things. Um, but coming from what do you think that it is about you, and specifically being a special operations, um, you know, uh, soldier being a Green Beret? What does that entail? Like, what do you bring to the table that changes things up in politics? Like, how do you see that as being, obviously I know this already, leadership capabilities, your decisive decision making, obviously the experience on the ground. What is it that you bring to the table that like is your, I don't know, that scares your opponents? That's kind of what I'm looking for. What is it that you bring to the table that correlates from time in the special forces community?
I think a lot of it is being able to actually articulate ground truth. I mean, I think a lot of times in politics, you get these people who kind of had a trajectory that was always pushing them towards politics. So they went to the right schools. Yeah, they got a job. They're a lawyer. There's something prestigious where they can make enough money that they can go and run for office eventually. And so, like, they don't feel very comfortable going down to the ground level, whatever the ground level is, whether it's a school board meeting, a construction site, or whatever, and saying, "Hey, what do you guys really need? What's really going on here?" I think that gives me a pretty unique ability because that was my job for 20 years, man. I mean, we had to go out and we had to talk to all the different factions, all the different tribes, and we had to work on, making sure that they didn't kill each other, they didn't kill us, and we got some stuff done. I think being able to get out there and not being beholden to people too. I think if you're an unconventional political candidate, like politics wasn't the trajectory of your entire life, you're a threat to the system because hey, I lost my last election. Yeah, that sucked. Okay, whatever. But you know what? It wasn't like the only thing I had going on in my life. I'm going to run again because I want to make a difference. Like, I don't really necessarily care about what this political party, that political party, whatever special interest group like says about me. Like, if it's the end of my political career, like, okay, I care in the sense that I want to be able to make a difference, but it's not something you can really hold over my head. I think that does scare the opposition, the establishment, however you want to look at it. But really, I think at the end of the day, I mean, I keep going back to ground truth because there's just so much nonsense out there. And if you're willing to go out and put in the hard work and actually talk to real humans, you can make a real difference. And that's kind of been my theme since I started out in politics.
Yeah, and that's good to hear because even though, you may have not gotten like the trophy at the end of the race in terms of winning that congressional seat, getting out there and like integrating yourself with the local population and allowing them to see that you're somebody that's willing to, engage with them and get out there on the front lines and in the community. I think that's a huge thing the most important thing, because at the end of the day, like yes, you want to enact change in the policy, but also if you're out there and you're able to do things to, brighten someone's, and I know as petty and as low that may sound to some people, but if you're out there engaging in your community and you're doing little things to like change the life of, the people that are close to you or that you see in the local park district or, like your the local city, that right there is like a step in the right direction because I think a lot of people with social media and the technology we have now forget how to engage like face to face. I mean, obviously you
Oh
and
yeah.
I are sitting
Oh
here
yeah.
on the computer doing this, but it's so much of this like clickbait bullshit and like a headline with no meat to the story type of thing to like get people to I don't know, like what's the right word? Like starting a fire, like yelling
The
fire
visceral
and everything.
reaction.
Yeah.
That's all they're looking
So
for.
so you're
Love it, hate it. That's it.
yeah, but being out there and actually engaging with the local population and doing that like the groundwork, how do you see yourself making it? Because like we obviously all know that the media misconstrues everything and isn't able to, portray the story in the right way. How are you going to combat that with being somebody that's looking for this ground truth and, where do you bring that to light to make an impact beyond all the bullshit that's happening out there?
It's definitely challenging, man, especially if you self-identify as like a Republican or like, I'm kind of like an America First Trump guy. So you're going to get villainized, like you just are. And the opposition, any kind of threat to the establishment, the media is going to, they're going to dogpile on you. I'm used to that now. I mean, at first I was kind of like, wow, that happened fast. And so it is very, very challenging. Social media, as horrible as it is, it's kind of a godsend, especially now that Twitter's kind of been freed up by Elon. That helps for sure. Individual like podcasts like this I absolutely love because people get a chance to know me, and we can put that out there and like there's nothing they can do about it. We can put it on Rumble, you can put it wherever you're going to put it. I think it's very, very powerful, man. I think that the podcast format is how we break through a lot of the media. But then also the grassroots stuff. My campaign, we knocked on 130,000 doors last
Jeez.
cycle. We're going to do the exact same thing over and over, because that's really in the primary. I took out an incumbent, so I primaried a fellow Republican who was back. She was a sitting congresswoman. She was backed by the establishment. The only reason I beat her is because we went out and knocked on doors. I did about 300 in-person town halls where I had conversations with people, and people could ask me whatever they wanted to ask me. They could record me. They could try and play gotcha, which most people actually don't do. Most people are actually like pretty. If you put yourself out there, I've been pretty surprised that most people actually, even if they don't agree with everything you say, they're like, "Oh, a conversation, okay." Like we're actually kind of programmed to have real conversations.
Yeah.
So but man, the media it's challenging. I mean, if you look at what just happened with Tucker Carlson, it's like even someone like that who's turning over such a massive profit for a major station, they're still like, "I'm sorry, you're not allowed to say the things that you just said.
Yeah.
Like we're going to keep paying you, but we're going to take you off the air." And so I just, man, people have got to hopefully wake up and see that like the vast majority of what you see in the media, the mainstream media, you're being shown that for a reason, you
Right.
know? So I think our generation and younger, I feel like they understand that, but it is hard. You get saturated with it.
Yeah, it's difficult to sift through all the BS that's out there because there's so much of it, and where do you decipher what is truth when there's so many different slander pieces or stories that are misconstrued to make somebody look bad or an organization look bad. I mean you know Tucker Carlson's one thing, but also like seeing James O'Keefe being pushed out of his own company that he
Yeah.
started. It seems like the people that are bringing the truth to light and willing to go and do the investigative research and bring the truth that has been like completely shadowed by the mainstream media. I mean, once that starts happening, you can see like the dominoes start to fall and like what the motive really is, which is it's really disheartening to see. But beyond the political stuff, and I'm really fortunate to have you come on and say that because I think that obviously you're in Washington State, but that doesn't mean that one day like you might not be the guy that's running for president. And seeing that you've got to reach out to, like the part of the reason why I started to do this podcast is to bridge the gap, not only between the disconnects between civilians and veterans, but like the veterans themselves. So like you being a soft dude and being in the Army, me being in the Marine Corps, the Air Force pilot, or the naval boatsman's mate or something. Like everybody has a similarity, and if we can show you like being that guy that yes, I was a Green Beret, but that doesn't negate the fact that you're still a human being. You're a father. You're somebody who's patriotic and loves their country, and you don't want to see us go down this road anymore. A lot of people can relate to that and be like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. This guy's pretty knowledgeable, and that's the whole point and part of why I wanted to get you on here to be able to share your story, and obviously on the side of like how you're still advocating for America, even though that there's been times that I'm sure that you've felt quite slighted by the decisions that your country has made, and you still had to go out there and perform to the best of your abilities. Um, what do you like if you could go back, and I mean maybe tell this to your younger self, as you're coming up, and whether it be the special forces community or just in the Army in general, throughout all the life lessons that you've learned, if there's a piece of advice you could go back and give your younger self, what would be like point number one? What would be like your key point?
I would really say, and this is kind of cheesy, but I would say, enjoy the moment that you're in. I was always very goal oriented. Like I wanted to do like the next thing, the next thing. But those moments go really fast, especially when you're a young man, living your dreams, pursuing your dreams. Enjoy that. Make personal connections. I mean, I can't tell you. I just found out last night actually. A guy I served with. I wasn't incredibly close with him, but we were together every day for like a very long, crappy deployment. Found out that he passed away from cancer. I mean, we lost touch over the years, but it's just like, man, if I could go back and like maybe write down like some notes, maybe every day, every other day of like what was happening. I mean, now it's easier because like everybody's got a phone on, or a camera on their phone and all that. Like that. I would say take pictures. There was like a lot of deployments I went on where I was like, I'm not going to take any pictures because I'm secret squirrel guy or
Yeah, it's
whatever.
just
And yeah, like honestly, I had a team leader, a captain who my first three deployments, he was really good about taking pictures, and we made fun of him for it, like relentlessly. However, I wouldn't have any pictures of those first couple deployments if he wouldn't have taken any pictures. So
right.
like just that type of stuff, and then keeping those personal bonds. There's a lot of guys I've stayed in touch with over the years, but it gets hard as people get older and you move on. But yeah, I would say like enjoy every moment you're in. Really value the personal relationships, because at the end of it, when all of it goes away, that's really what's going to matter, is those personal relationships. So that, I mean, that would be my advice. I mean, other than that, it's the real basic stuff of like always work hard, always try and do the best job that you can in the position that you're in. And again, just don't ever take those personal relationships for granted. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think those personal relationships are key into the perfect segue as well into the next question I want to ask you is that, do you have some advice for, somebody, and it doesn't have to be a military oriented question. If there's a listener out there that, if anybody even listens to this podcast, I'm not really sure. I don't really keep up on the viewership. It's if somebody's out there struggling and they're going through a hard time, you've been through some interesting circumstances yourself and some definite moments of hardship, what's a word of advice that you have on somebody that's like really down in the dumps right now, or they're like looking for a way to move forward?
I mean, I would say number one, reach out. I mean, all of us, like if you're, I feel like you can probably talk to any veteran, and regardless of kind of like you said, regardless of what you did in the service. I mean, if you were of our generation of warriors, like we all have probably a couple deployments in common. And when we transitioned away from that, regardless of how we transitioned away, we probably all have similar feelings. So I'd say reach out for number one. Number two is you've got to find the next mission. Whether that's working at a business, whether that's going and taking care of your family, whether that's writing a book, whatever it is, you got to find the next mission, because you're hardwired for a mission. You wouldn't have joined the military in the first place and volunteered to go get shot at for a living if you were somebody who was just going to be happy sitting around and hanging out. Like that's just not how you're hardwired. And it's a hard stop, man. And I equate it to like falling down the stairs. Like when you get off the ride of the military and then you stop suddenly like that, I think that can be very, very traumatic for people. So I do think it's important. I mean, you don't want to stress yourself out. You don't want to try and replicate combat again, but you do want to find something to continue to work for. I mean, for me, it was jumping into politics, but if it's not jumping into politics, then I would just say find that next mission. And if you're not sure what that next mission is, then just work on something small. Try and be the best that you can to your family, in your community, at whatever your job is. But if the more that you sit around, I think, and kind of wallow at what you've lost, that's where I think guys get into a really, really bad spot.
Yeah, I agree. And also it's like there's so many like not just the VA. I think everybody's got their qualms with the VA, and I've had plenty of negative experiences, and I've also had plenty of positive experiences with the VA. It's about how much you're willing to advocate for yourself and how much work that you're going to invest into bettering yourself. With that also there's nonprofits and different organizations that are out there. Do you have one that you kind of stand behind or support, or that you've participated in?
There's a bunch of really good ones out there. A couple of my teammates from my first ODA, they just started a equine therapy. So it's a couple guys that were out in Oklahoma. They grew up riding horses and raising horses. They got out of the military and they started the 535 Foundation. So basically, they take veterans out to Oklahoma and they let them ride horses and just kind of get them away from the hustle and bustle, and put them on a horse and let them do cowboy stuff. And so I think that's a great organization. Special Operations Warrior Foundation, they have a lot of good programs, mostly for Gold Star kids, but they also help out veterans. Green Beret Foundation is really good for our community. They're starting to get some legs underneath them. Because my late wife deployed a lot with Naval Special Warfare, the Navy SEAL Foundation, very well funded. They have a lot of resources as well. There is, like you said, there's a lot of really good organizations out there. There's a lot of people that want to help. If you kind of know where to look. But I also think it's really cool when people do what my buddies did, and they kind of start their own thing, and they're not huge, they're not making a ton of money, they're not able to take 100 vets out at once, but they're able to take out a couple, and I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've got when you say obviously the Green Beret Foundation is one of the more notable ones. I have a good friend of mine. I don't know if you'd know him. He's a Green Beret as well. His name's Joe Lowry. He took a PKM round to the head, and he's like paralyzed on the entire left side of his body. But the resilience that this guy has shown, absolutely unbelievable. I mean, he gets up every day and he makes sure that like he gets out of his chair and he walks. The guy's been rock climbing, jumped out of planes. We went whitewater rafting together, like shooting cowboy guns on the range. And it's unbelievable to see the dedication that he has, like bettering himself, following in the word of God. There's so many, we can get into all these organizations. But I definitely will tag those, put those on there because I love to show other possibilities for nonprofits out there to people to look into. I mean, you can find nonprofits that like you want to work with leather or learn how to plant or be involved in some running group, whatever it may be. There's something for people out there. So every guest that I have on and talk to, I always try to find a new nonprofit, be able to put the information out there about them so people can find maybe something new that they want to get involved in. One last question for you. I appreciate all the time that you've given me, but with you participating in pretty much the entirety of the global war on terror, couple years shy, um, through all the experiences that you've had, all the loss, all the struggle, all the funny times, um, all the times sitting around waiting for a mission, or all those times setting up a charge or breaching and making entry. If you can think about all that shit, collectively, and if there was one word that you could use to describe the GWAT, what would that word be?
That's a tough one. Um, Man, that's a good one. It's kind of it's I don't know if dichotomy explains it in one word, but I think the whole experience was kind of like a dichotomy. Like it's like the best and the worst times. I don't know a good word that combines those off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, just that the for me it's dichotomy because it's like in one moment I have the best times, the best memories of my life, with the exception of watching my sons be born. Were overseas, in crappy spots doing crappy things. But like they're some of the happiest memories, but at the same time, same thing, like some of the most painful memories I have, were in those exact same places. So it's just man, it's the duality, I guess,
Yeah,
duality, dichotomy, whatever it is. But then, same thing too. It's like at a bigger picture, it was the best of our generation. Like our country got attacked, and how many of us like volunteered to go over there, and not just once, but like I don't know too many veterans that just have one deployment. I know guys that are anywhere from like 2 to 3 to like I know guys that have like 14 deployments.
right.
So it's like the best of our generation. But then at the same time, the flip side of that, the dichotomy is I think it showed the worst of our political class at the same time. So that's kind of what comes to mind.
Oh, that's a great explanation of it, and I think a lot of guys have that um well, I was gonna say ambivalence, like the on the fence about which way to make a decision on the type of vocabulary they're going to use to depict what they envision the GWAT as. And people don't want to be harsh and say that it was like a lie, and they don't want to be like, oh, they don't want to say that it was like the best time of my life. There's a whole bunch of things that like interwoven on the good and bad side of things. So dichotomy, that's a good word because good description, because there are times that you look at your buddy and you laugh, or maybe you guys like an RPG just flew over your head and blew up behind you, and you're like, "Holy shit, that was crazy. We could have died, but man, that was awesome." Like that, and maybe, I don't know. There's so many things you can correlate that to, but Joe, is there anything else that you want to add, or something that you'd like to say to the listeners? I know we've covered quite a bit and we glossed over a lot, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm just getting you on here to have you tell um, you know your war stories and stuff. I appreciate the in-depthness that you've gone through and explaining, like your time in the service, some of the loss that you had, and where you are today. With that being said, is there anything that you can think of that we may have glossed over and not hit on?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate what you're doing too. I think we need more guys out there having these discussions and putting them out there, so that it's not all lost. I mean, I think we have a lot to say, and I think this is a great format. Just having two guys who have a lot in common have a discussion, so that people could listen to it, they can learn from it, hopefully. But no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's all meant to. I think it's important for everybody's stories to be heard, to be documented, so that the follow-on generations can see, like what should and shouldn't be done, and some of the things, lessons that we learn the hard way. They don't have to go through and do that. But on that note, Joe, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice to this amazing nation. And you motivate me to make a difference in a better way and get off the sidelines, and be a bigger part of it. So for that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, man. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for your service too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And everybody, that was Joe Kent, Green Beret, congressional candidate in 2022. He's gonna be back at it again. So thank you for your time. We'll talk later. All right, brother.
Thanks, man.
See ya.